Moving to a Next.js stack gives you reusable components, faster SEO-friendly pages, and a development workflow built on Git history and pull requests. But for digital agencies, this introduces a serious operational friction. In the past, the baseline model for agency hosting was highly profitable. A single, cheap cPanel account running PHP and MySQL could host dozens of client websites and databases on the same shared server. Next.js changes that math. A modern full-stack project demands a dedicated Node.js runtime, an active build process, isolated environment variables, and separate managed services for your database and file storage. This diagram compares the two approaches. On the left, everything lives in one box. On the right, the Next.js architecture splits into separate pieces. Because you are now paying for distinct managed services, agencies are looking at a spike in per-project hosting costs. This creates a difficult choice. Agency owners are trying to figure out how to drive hosting costs down to the absolute minimum without sacrificing their profit margins or taking on a massive DevOps burden. The shift to Next.js means the shared hosting account can no longer handle your requirements. Agencies now manage Node.js runtimes, complex build flows, and external databases for every project they deliver. A common workaround agency owners attempt is creating a fragmented net of free tier accounts. They spin up generic client email addresses to register separate Vercel Hobby and MongoDB free accounts, hoping to isolate billing per project. This strategy introduces immediate risk. Looking at this strategy report, the highlighted warning makes it clear. Vercel's Hobby tier is restricted to non-commercial, personal use. Bootstrapping paid client sites on these accounts violates the terms of service and risks a sudden site takedown. The technical limits are just as dangerous. Moving down to the database guidance table, the MongoDB Atlas Free M0 tier caps storage at 512 megabytes. It runs on shared resources with no production guarantee, making it unfit for an actual CMS client. Beyond the platform limits, you are creating an administrative hurdle. Managing multi-factor authentication, password resets, and critical billing alerts across 50 different generic Gmail accounts will slow down your entire development team. Hacking your way to project isolation by stringing together free tiers saves a few dollars on paper. In practice, it exposes your clients to outages and buries your agency in administrative debt. The main reason agencies try that fragmented strategy is the appeal of billing isolation. They want to ensure a billing issue on Project A never touches Project B. But that isolation comes at a cost to security. Checking this internal table, when developers share a single generic login for a client project, you lose auditability. If production data is deleted, you cannot identify who made the change. A more secure approach is centralizing your architecture. Looking at the recommended setup, we see the standard. Run your agency out of a single company GitHub organization and MongoDB Atlas organization. To make this centralized model work, you need strict version control. Every project repository needs a standardized 4-branch system: main for production, staging for client review, dev for internal testing, and isolated feature branches for active developer work. Centralization also changes how you handle sensitive data. You should commit a .env.example file to your repositories so your team knows which variables are required, but the actual API keys and passwords stay isolated within your central hosting provider. By giving up absolute billing isolation, you gain role-based security. If a developer leaves your agency, revoking their single seat instantly terminates their access to all repositories and databases. This quadrant chart maps your 3 realistic infrastructure paths based on their per-project cost versus the ongoing maintenance burden they demand from your team. Notice that traditional web hosting isn't a viable option. It cannot handle the Node.js runtime needed for a Next.js backend. Down on the VPS row, a virtual private server offers the lowest absolute per-project cost, letting you pack multiple projects onto a single instance. The trade-off is the DevOps requirement. A bare metal VPS requires a dedicated technical owner, managing Linux security patches, firewall configurations, and automated backups. Moving up to managed Node.js hosting, the provider handles the server maintenance. You get direct GitHub deployments and predictable scaling without needing an in-house systems administrator. On the far end, premium platforms like Vercel Pro offer features like instant rollbacks and preview URLs. But those high recurring monthly costs will eat into your margins if you apply them to basic brochure or CMS clients. Choosing your infrastructure is a decision between paying for managed computing power upfront or paying in unbillable developer hours fixing server configurations later. Even with the right server, hidden costs can quietly drain your project budgets. In Next.js applications, the most common culprit is database bloat, caused by storing heavy client media files directly inside MongoDB. In this workflow diagram, we see the architectural fix. You decouple your file storage. When a client uploads an image, route the actual file into an independent S3-compatible storage bucket. Then, only save a tiny text URL pointing to that file inside your database. For the storage bucket itself, platforms like Cloudflare R2 provide a distinct financial advantage. R2 eliminates data egress fees, meaning your costs stay predictable even if a client's public download traffic suddenly increases. Because you're keeping your database lightweight, you can optimize your Atlas tiers. Just make sure you aren't leaving production projects on the free tier unless the client accepts that they have no performance guarantees. Decoupling your heavy object storage from your database architecture prevents forced tier upgrades and locks in your monthly overhead. This strategy document concludes with a clear recommendation. Centralize your organization. Do not create separate Vercel and MongoDB logins for every single project by default. We can map out the tech stack based on the contract you're signing. This decision matrix shows 3 distinct paths. For standard basic CMS clients, the most balanced setup is your central GitHub organization paired with managed Node.js hosting, MongoDB Atlas, and Cloudflare R2. For a high volume of low-budget projects, consolidating dozens of tiny sites onto a single centralized VPS is viable if you have an assigned technical owner. Finally, isolated client-owned accounts are the exception, used only for projects demanding direct billing from the start. Aligning your technology stack to the financial profile of the contract protects your profit margins and prevents your team from over-engineering simple projects. Building with Next.js means your team is now managing a distributed cloud environment. Clinging to decentralized free-tier hacks or unmanaged servers means your internal operations will break down under the weight of administrative friction. Build your real costs into your business model. Keep your hosting, database, and maintenance expenses visible in every client quotation, so you never absorb the operating costs of the products you build. Standardizing on a centralized infrastructure is a practical way to cut developer hours and minimize security risks across your client portfolio.